Welcome to the Even Better podcast, where your host, Sinikka Waugh of Your Clear Next Step, brings you exciting content about making communities better by helping people get even better at work.
Well, hello and welcome to today's edition of the Even Better podcast. This is Sinikka Waugh, and I'm so delighted to have you join us today. Welcome to our guest, Kevin Sutherland. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So to those of you who are listening and just joining in, Kevin is a new acquaintance. Kevin and I had a chance to get to know each other just a little bit at the recent IBAD, so the International Institute of Business Analysis Development Day. It was, I don't know how many of these IBADs now that I've been attending, all of them. I've only missed one in all of the years that we've had IBAD here in central Iowa, and was delighted to be back in person, live again. And as true to the Business Analysis Development Day forum here in central Iowa, we built our energy during the course of the day and stuck around at the end of the day for networking and social hour, and got a chance to stand around a table and visit a little bit with Kevin, and got to hear a little bit more about him and what he does. And I know he had also presented during the course of the day. I did not get a chance to hear his presentation or his session, but I heard about it during the session pitches. And in our conversation at the networking session, I just realized that Kevin and I we talk the same talk, and we're singing to the same tune. And so I'm just delighted to have Kevin on this podcast today. I know he's an independent consultant, and he too is helping others deliver value to the users, to customers, to citizens. I know he's been in IT for years, and he's been part of these large transformational system integration projects all over the place. And he's done a lot to help people collaborate and create ways to improve the world around him and deliver value. And so I'll let Kevin tell more about his story, but Kevin, thank you so much for being here today.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I really do love the mission for Clear Next Step, helping people have better work days so that together we can co-create better communities. That does resonate and is something that I feel like is worthwhile to be attempting to try to do on a daily basis. But my background is I am from Iowa. I graduated at ISU in 2001 with a degree in material science engineering. So immediately threw that one away and went to work for Accenture doing system implementation work out in California. I was talking to my brother, and he's like, "You should come out here. I'm working out here. It's pretty awesome." I was like, "All right, cool." So moved out to Sacramento and did a whole lot of large government complex implementations, welfare system, child support system, pension system. We ended up selling one of the solutions that we built to Iowa for Affordable Care Act, and so got sent back here to implement that, and ended up quitting the Accenture side of my career and starting my own independent practice here after we got some of that system live, and have been doing that ever since. So moving towards focus on some of the things you mentioned, how to improve our behaviors in a manner that's effective and making progress, and using some of the Agile values and principles.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to pause there because you've said a couple things that I've had experience in a couple of the things that you shared, and I'm going to look for you. You pick which ones you want to compare and contrast. So you've had coastal experience, California, Iowa. You've had large corporation, large consulting firm, and then start your own, like work for yourself, independent consultant, and you've had government, non-government. You've had so talk to me, compare, contrast any of those. Where what lights you up, Kevin?
Sure. I guess an easy one to compare and contrast out of that list is corporate job versus being independent consultant. And I think that the key thing that stands out there is that as a independent contractor, I have one boss that I'm corresponding with, which is the client boss, the people that I'm working with to improve their lives. And in a corporate job, I have two bosses, right? I've got the client boss and then the corporate boss. And often in some of those situations, you get into conflicts, which is not a comfortable place to be in. So I do enjoy the one boss scenario.
I can see that. I can see that. So you found your way to Iowa. So Sacramento back to Iowa, and you've stayed here. How long have you been back in Iowa?
We have been here since 2012. So moved into Ankeny. Originally was from Cedar Rapids, and have been up here. Found an interesting little spot where we've got 2.5 acres and a creek, and so we've really been loving it. The kids really enjoy it. When derecho came through, it knocked down like 30 mature trees, so we built a log cabin, and that's been an interesting addition to the yard and something that we can enjoy. So yeah, we've been getting a kick out of having some space. California, definitely awesome weather, but no room for things like that.
You bet. You bet. Okay, so today we're talking about 5 principles that teams can adopt to increase agility without doing agile. And I want to pause on this one a little bit because I want to make sure that as we're thinking about our audience and who might be listening, this isn't just for agile teams. This isn't just for software development teams. This isn't just for IT teams. This isn't just for those teams who are doing large transformational system integration teams, right? These are principles that teams of any type can adopt to increase agility without doing agile. Is that a fair interpretation of what you're about to tell us?
Yep, that's correct. For sure.
Okay.
Universal.
Yep, teams anywhere, anyhow, teams of any size.
Yeah, I think it would apply to almost any situation. I mean, I will talk, there's some models that we could talk through that would identify the type of work that's being done. And the principles that I'm about to talk through do optimize for more complex type of work, may not be ideal for more simple things that people would be doing, but for the most part, applicable across the board.
Okay. Sounds great. So you've selected 5 principles that teams can adopt to increase agility without doing agile, but your full list is really about 8. So talk to us, how do we go from 8 to 5, or where do we pick up what's missing, or what are we going to do with those other 3?
Sure. And this is a list of principles we've been working with in the current job that I have, which is working with Iowa Medicaid and the team there. But what we've centered on is this list of leading with vision, focusing on outcomes, keeping it safe, doing less, doing it sooner, doing it better, doing it together, and then learning and repeating back to that next do less item. And those first 3, lead with vision, focus on outcomes, keep it safe, those are important just across the board for everybody to be adhering to, but are often determined by the environment, the culture that teams might reside in. And so typically they'll be heavily affected by the behavior of leadership, managers, and those types of folks. And while necessary for teams to be adhering to those, often have a lot less control. So, we could do a whole podcast on those first 3 principles, right? And I'm sure there are many out there that are along those lines, but figured for a podcast that's targeted towards the team level, focusing on the last 5, less, sooner, better, together, learn, would be a good place to focus. And if you really don't have those top 3, I mean, the bottom 5 don't really work. So there's got to be at least some semblance of vision, outcomes, and safety involved. But if you've got at least one leader that's supporting a team, I think there's always a path to agility, leveraging the full set.
Okay, so let me pause for a second. So those first 3, lead with vision. So that's about having a direction, knowing where we're headed, focus on outcomes, knowing what success looks like, and keeping it safe. How do you describe outcomes and safety? How just make sure we're all on the same page here.
Yeah, so outcomes over solutions. So a lot of times what you'll see is a mindset of, here's something we want to do, but I'm going to tell a team, here's a tool I want to buy, or here's a system I want you to implement, or here's an interface you need to create. But instead focusing on, I want to improve, make it more, less time to complete this activity, or increase user satisfaction of this thing that people want to do with the software that you're proposing. That's more the outcomes focus, is turning that from a solution driven request to an outcomes driven one, and just keeping that in the mindset in general, is thinking in terms of those outcomes that you want to achieve as opposed to the how and the solutions. And then safety is more around, you hear the term psychological safety a lot, giving people trust, ability to collaborate, feel like they can raise issues without consequences or problems being brought upon them, and fully bringing the voices of everyone that's involved to the table, and the comfort level of being able to do that and collaborating with people without a fear.
Yep. Okay, that makes good sense. Okay, so these next 5 that we're going to go through are 5 principles that teams can adopt to increase agility without doing agile. So before we do that, why would one want to increase your agility? Why? What's the benefit there?
Well, that's a good question. So, and maybe that's a good time to go through the models piece of this. Have you heard of Cynefin? Is that something that's come up in your?
I don't think.
Okay. So let's talk Cynefin just real quick. So this is a model that was developed, I think, back in 1999. Dave Snowden introduced it as a model to identify the management techniques that should be applied based on the type of work that you're trying to accomplish. So there's 4 quadrants, and the center being don't know, but the quadrants are go from simple or clear, something that might have like a step-by-step process that would be real easy to convey to someone to do that activity. Complicated, which would be something that requires expertise to identify. Complex, which is where you see most software delivery falling, in an emergent domain where there are unknown unknowns, and when you implement something, you might learn something that changes everything about what you were trying to do. Less so that being true in the complicated and simple domains. And then you've got chaos, which is, it's completely unpredictable. So like COVID-19 would be a good example of that. It introduced a lot of chaos into environments and just need for immediate responsiveness. So the management technique that's important in each one of those domains varies. And agility is something that's been identified as a very effective way to manage work that's in that complex domain. So the principles that I'll be talking to are really optimized for when we're doing work in a complex, emergent place of work. And the reason that's important is because the level of learning that happens in a domain like that is often very high, and the ability to adjust to new learning is really critical. So if you're not behaving with agility, you might be doing something where you're sticking with a plan that becomes outdated as soon as that plan meets the enemy, right? And if that plan's not adjusted, you could run into results that are not what you want.
Makes very good sense. Makes very good sense. Okay. So 5 principles teams can adopt to increase agility without doing agile. First one is to do less. This sounds very, very appealing to me. Let's talk through that. What do you mean by do less?
Yeah, it sounds really simple, right? So, I think this is probably the most important one that I would say when it comes to this team level set of 5. And it's also probably the hardest because it's something that is often very counterintuitive for people, mostly because we grow up learning how to deal with problems in that simple and that complicated domain. So there's usually a set of things that we can know and understand up front. We can lay out what it looks like and we can get to a solution. We're not as accustomed to solving problems that when we try something, everything changes and we have to maybe try something else. And it's just not typical that people receive training on how to manage that emergent situations like that as well. So in a lot of analogies you hear justify that as well. So like, you'll hear, well, we would never like do less. The concept you would apply to that, like if you use like a bridge example, I'm gonna build a bridge. The do less example would be like get one ability for one person to walk across the bridge and build that out, right? And then build enough room for 2 people and then 3. But that doesn't make any sense, right? So we would never build a bridge doing that. We would articulate the full set of plans with a load bearing calculation and all the rivets identified and the cables that we would need for the full completion of the project, and have experts that validate that that's going to work, and then build it to that specification, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of counterintuitiveness that's built into it, and when you apply that same concept to software, that's not true. It's not something where you'd want to build the whole thing based on predefined plans. I think a good example of this is, and I mentioned this in the presentation I did in IBAD, is the quote by Lao Tzu, is a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, which I love, but I think when applied to complex emergent situations really should be reframed to, when delivering something large, complex, and emergent, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with confirming we have the correct destination. Because if you go 1,000 miles and you go to the wrong spot, that's not what you really want out of it, right? And so how do we confirm we have the correct destination? Part of it's those first 2 principles we talked about: have that vision, understand where it is that you want to go, have the outcomes in mind to keep you on track. But the third part is really this do less, is figure out what the smallest experiment is that you could run that'll determine if you're going to the right spot, which is, again, real challenging to do. But there's 3 different approaches that I talked about at IBAD for trying to achieve this. One is creating an outcomes hierarchy, so taking a look at your mission and breaking that down into subsets that all roll up. Another being scope segmentation, where you can define different categories of what you're trying to do and split it up that way. And the other one being an MVP, which would be, just everybody knows what an MVP is these days, right? But get a minimum viable thing out there that does what you are hoping for. And as an example to that, I mean, these are a lot easier to explain using an example. If I'm currently working on Medicaid modernization and we're looking to leverage all three of these with the first work that we're doing, we are looking to do provider management improvement. And so from an outcomes hierarchy standpoint, you've got the goal of the Medicaid agency being to improve the lives of Medicaid members. One way to do that is to improve the quality of the provider network. One way to do that is that we can improve provider experience in Medicaid so that we're increasing that network all the way down to we can improve the ability for new providers to enroll in the system. So those all kind of nest up to that top goal. That's outcome hierarchy. We're also using scope segmentation so that there's somewhere between 80 and 100 different types of providers. They all have different rules, different steps that they would need to go through to enroll. We could start with just one and say, all right, well, let's get this one working for provider enrollment only, get it running through the system. And then from an MVP standpoint, this one's a little tougher because we're in such a complex environment and we're choosing to use a SaaS solution to start out with. If you were doing something custom, that would be very simple, like just, get a first web page up and get somebody that can submit an application. But even with a SaaS solution, one of the things we're considering is put that out there and just output a PDF that we can then key into the existing systems, start that way, right? And that's just an MVP version versus let's integrate all the systems together and make sure they work before we go to somebody to learn if it even works for them. So that's kind of 3 examples of do less that we're exploring right now.
Okay. So let's move on to a second one. Do it sooner. Also something that speaks favorably to many, many of us out there. I want it faster. So how do we do that? What does that look like?
And as you can imagine, do it sooner is very dependent on do less. So like the better you do less, the better you'll be able to do it sooner. But I think there's like a single metric that teams could look at to determine how well that they achieve do it sooner, which is lead time. How long is it between the time that we identified a need for something that we want to when that need is satisfied or delivered in some way to the people that need it? So just start measuring that, which is often pretty simple for organizations. That they often have tracking tools where somebody has a request, it gets logged somewhere, it's date stamped. Just start taking a look at what's the difference between the date stamp of those things that come in and when they get delivered. I think the key there is that you're really measuring how long it takes to get to that value, how long it takes to get to someone using it, not some sub-step of that process, and figuring that out.
This is one, and I'll pause and just chime in here. This is one of those that has such broad implications outside of software, outside of so many things, because you get what you measure. And we've known this for years and years and years. And in so many cases, we're simply not measuring. We're simply not measuring. And if you want it sooner, one of the best ways to get it sooner is to find out how long does it take you today. If you don't even know how long it takes you today, you can't possibly get it sooner because you don't know. And so start by measuring, and then you can figure out how to shorten that time, and then you can do it sooner.
Yep. And I think that one of the ways to do it sooner, in addition to do less, is you might hear stop starting and start finishing. And a lot of organizations, that the flow of work just continues to be thrown at the teams that are doing the work and do things all the time, just creating this pile of in parallel work that creates task switching, that creates inefficiencies in wait times because you've got 20 things going on. And so, you're only doing one at a time. All the other 19 are waiting during that time, which is another thing you can try to measure as well, as how, what flow efficiency is another metric. When we look at something that made it from request to completion, how much time was spent with that, having no one working on it, right? So that's often very high. And if you just think through some of the things you're working on and seeing where items are in a wait state, you'll often be able to identify, here's some big spaces that we could take a look at.
We did just a quick analysis the other day of the projects that are in flight in our organization just right now. And I went, oh, we know better than that. We know better than that.
We know better, but we can't help ourselves. So yeah, find one to finish and put everybody on it and get it done, right?
Yep. And for heaven's sakes, don't start anymore until at least most of them are done. Oh.
Say no. That's another technique, right? Is the teams can try to get better at. I know people want to be helpful and they want to say yes to new things, but figuring out creative ways to say no, right? Like, how does this fit in? What's the priority? If you had to choose between these two things, which one would you choose? I mean, there's a lot of ways that teams can actually have an impact on the answer of no with requests.
Yes, I'd love to start on that as soon as this other project is done.
Yeah, sounds great. I love it. Which one's more important?
Yep, awesome. All right, so for those of you who've just joined in, you need to pause and go back to the beginning because we're having just this delightful conversation with Kevin Sutherland, and we're talking about 5 principles that teams can adopt to increase agility without doing Agile. And we've started with doing less and doing it sooner, and now we're on to number 3, which is do it better. Ooh, I like that one too, Kevin. What do you mean by that? Do it better.
Do it better. And I think a key to this really goes back to one of those first 3 principles, focus on outcomes. Having a clear success criteria or definition of done, how you refer to that, for like that do less item that ties back to the outcomes, and really ensuring that you're focused on delivering that value that we're expressing in those outcome terms. And really, when you complete any one of those do less items, you should see an outcome improvement, or at a minimum, lots of learning that you've achieved, right? If you didn't get the outcome you wanted, you should at least know, okay, what do we need to try next time to make an improvement here? And a great example of this is a story I could dig into from my past working on the policy administration system for insurance, where I kind of came in at the middle of it and was asked to help out with the conversion team, this is one of the situations where they were doing waterfall with Scrum in the middle. So like a big 12-month plan with an inception phase for 3 months where they identified all the stories that needed to be completed, and then they assigned them to month-long sprints, but they divide them up among all the different functional silos, like customization team, a print team, rating team, conversion team. And then even within the conversion team, they had divided into a BA sub-team, a development sub-team, and a QA sub-team. So basically everybody was working on different stories at different sprints, even on the same team, but they were having the same stand-up and talking about different things together, right? So when I joined the team, I would sit in on meetings and listen to some of the debates which were occurring, which mostly involved arguments over the requirements document and whether the spreadsheet was correct or not. I mean, I even remember one argument that was, when I asked the question, what would happen if we just didn't make any changes to this? And the answer was, oh, nothing, it would be fine, right? It's all good. It's just that we're trying to figure out how we match the requirements to things. So what we did is we said, okay, let's take a step back, guys. We're 2 or 3 months behind from the plan. This doesn't seem to be working. Let's talk about what those outcomes are. What do we want to accomplish as a conversion team? What would success look like? And the answer was, well, better in this case is when we convert all the policies and the legacy policies renew in the new system, they should have the same policy details. They should be within X% of the premium and should work, right? And so we're like, great, cool. Can we measure this? And the answer was, well, no, but in a couple of weeks, the team was able to build up, like, here's a mass run where we can just put the conversion results through this assessment tool and see what percentage met our outcome criteria. And we basically said, all right, let's put all the requirements stuff that we did in Inception on hold, and let's focus entirely on the better criteria, what the result is that we want, and focus the team on that. And after about a month or 2, we were completely caught up and had the full conversion ready to go on schedule with the rest of the team. So that's one example of focusing on the true definition of done and having the team center on that, leading to a do it better result.
So I'm comparing that then to tools like exception-based reporting, tools like I use a project dashboard when I'm managing multiple things simultaneously that allows me to just flag the things that are off track or the things that are not quite as comfy as I'd like them to be. And my eye is drawn to the things that are not great so that I don't have to worry about the things that are great. And my eye is drawn to the things that need my focus or need my attention, right? The exception-based reporting allows me to correct the things that are out of bounds, bring those back into bounds, and not spend the time and attention on the things that are fine, right? So exception-based reporting allows you to to grab and bring the things back under control that need to be brought under control without spending a lot of time on the stuff that's fine. So
Sure.
those are ways to focus on, if you've only got limited time, focus on the stuff that needs to be brought under control instead of rehashing stuff that's already fine. Other things I'm thinking of that help us do better, my delight in the agile practices of the retrospective and the way that made it comfortable after so many years of calling them lessons learned, which sounds so painful, or the post-mortem when you kick it when it's dead, right? The idea of a retrospective, which is retro, right? And you get perspective
Sure.
because it's looking backward to look forward. Those ideas are things that help us do better, right?
Oh, for sure. And so you're already hitting on principle 5 there, which is learn and repeat in a retrospective. So having that focus on the outcome itself in that discussion is really key, right? Focusing on, all right, here was the definition of done included this outcome improvement. Here's what we got when we did this first item. All right, let's learn about what we should be doing differently to drive a better improvement in the outcome, do it more efficiently, whatever that might be. And I would say there's a couple other criteria that I would throw in there as do it better, definition of done criteria as well. Just the level of quality being clear and understood. And I think you could potentially vary that. It might be that while we're trying to explore and experiment, we all agree that that's low, but then once we determine where the target is and we're focused on it, it could be something that's scaled or something that's increased. But I think a definition of done is a great way to get common alignment between the team of people doing work and the stakeholders or other people that care about the work, and have that joint handshake. Do it better also includes compliance, right? I mean, that's such an important thing these days. If we don't get that right, we're in a whole lot of trouble. So ensuring that for every single one of those little do less things that you're working on, that they're meeting the compliance requirements, security. I mean, that's everybody's job, right? And do it better also includes making the work repeatable, especially if we're breaking things down into do less iterations. The ability to do that next one without breaking the first one is so important that you gotta have some criteria in there to be able to make sure you can continue to do ongoing work without going backwards.
Yep. That idea of definition of done and the clarifying the difference between how good is good enough for our various projects, right? Are we wrapping napkins for a barbecue? Well, then how carefully wrapped does this silverware need to be? If we're just going to tear the little napkin ring open and wipe barbecue off our faces, well, maybe that doesn't have to be perfect. Versus, are we working on life-saving microplastic devices that are used in surgeries? Well, that's different. We need perfection there, right?
Yeah.
How good is good enough, and defining that. But let's do that. And I wonder if this is going to lead to your next one too, which is doing it together, because we got to talk about that. We got to define that upfront, our level of doneness, and then don't we have to talk about it? Is that where you go in number 4, do it together?
Yeah, I think that, and just the concept of actually doing the work together.
Ooh, okay.
For all the people that are needed to get something done, ensuring that they're collaborating. And or a lot of people when they talk about this in software sense, they'll say pair programming, ensemble programming. Those are 2 examples of a do it together approach. I mean, at a minimum, I would say it's important to eliminate the silos, minimize dependencies, involve everybody that's required to get something completed. You might hear this also stated as like having cross-functional teams, multidisciplinary teams. I would say it also includes involving your end users, which is something that we often leave out because we're busy trying to get that work done. But do it together means get the people that are going to use this and their input and their voice into the work as you're doing it.
That point about the end user, one of my favorite customers for a long time, part of why they were my favorite was because they were so deliberate and so intentional about the voice of the customer that they actually had a cardboard cutout of their persona, their customer persona that came to their, like, not just their stakeholder meetings, not just their BA requirements gathering sessions and their various software development sessions and that sort of thing, but even their board meetings and their strategic planning sessions. They had this cardboard cutout of their user persona, their profile of their target customer. The cardboard cutout came to all of their meetings. And
did they do voice recordings from the?
I just saw the visual, but it was so powerful to me that They
That's
could
fun.
not forget that every member of that organization was aware of who their customer was, and that face of the customer was so visible and so present. I love that reminder to just do this together and include your customer too.
Yeah, and the conversion scenario I just went through a bit ago on Do It Better is a great example of this as well. When we created that definition of done criteria that was more end to end, that was focused on the final result that we were looking for, it naturally required the whole team, instead of working on their requirement story and then a developer doing a development story and then a tester doing a test story, it required them to come together and focus on what does it take to increase this percentage. Where are the problems? How do we distill this down into what needs to be changed? How do we get that changed? And how do we get it into the build? It also started to involve some of the other teams, because now we were holding the conversion team standard of success included changes that might have been not conversion issues. So things that might have been in the customization team. So now they had to pull in developers and include them in the team discussions that were not from their team. Whereas before they would have maybe just logged a defect, thrown it into a tool, hoped that someone dealt with it at some point, right? Now it was like, no, we need to get the percentage higher. So we got to include those folks and get it done, which was really effective and brought all those folks together to be working on it. Which it also drove closer coordination with the user. We had business stakeholders. We didn't actually have like policy folks that we'd bring in, but we had much closer engagement with the business folks that were responsible for the results of the conversion, the business, and demos with them where they were walking through, here are the key areas that we could be focusing on, and getting that feedback very much closer.
Nice. Do it together. So this is where our collaboration skills come in really important. This is where our facilitation skills are important. This is where our communication is important. That doing it together, we can all be more agile.
That's the second point on Do It Together as well. Is a very key component of that is getting the right people. Not every single person is cut out for Do It Together, or is interested in, has the will for Do It Together, and may not be interested in this work. So getting the right people is just so key. And that was actually another one of those stories that I told at IBAD, which was my favorite story about recruitment. I think Ernest Shackleton, he posted an advertisement in London. This is like back in the early 1900s. He was establishing a crew he needed for an expedition to Antarctica to do some sort of exploration, and basically posted this ad that said men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in event of success. So you wouldn't think you'd get much interest from that, but it turns out there were a lot of people that thought that sounded great. And to make a long story short, they set sail on their ship, the Endeavor, and that ship never made it back. They got stuck in the ice floe in Antarctica. The crew was stranded in extreme conditions with no shelter for 20 months. And so as advertised, like freezing cold, very dangerous, complete darkness probably for a good chunk of that time. But every single member of the crew made it back alive. And he had recruited the right people for that expedition, right? And I told this story at IBAD and got a question back from the audience that was, what was the honor and recognition when they made it back? And I was like, oh, shoot, they didn't make it back. So no honor and recognition, right? That was my answer at the time. But then I thought about it and I was like, wait a second. We're talking about these people that were on this ship. They're in a book, right? How many people do you know from the 1900s that we're talking about today? I would say that that's pretty decent honor and recognition. So I want to correct my answer to whoever asked that question to that answer.
That's a better answer.
Right? I thought so. But same concept applies to the work that we're doing. If we're not advertising in a similar way, like this is hard work. This takes rolling up your sleeves and challenging people and having hard conversations, right? And getting things right, and having humility, not having to be right, but getting to the right answer with folks that all have different opinions and diverse perspectives. That's not something that's easy to find. So
yeah, there are plenty out there that are not interested in that. And that's great. If that is not something that you want to do, then don't go down that path.
Right.
Yep. There are other paths that are equally honorable, just different. Yep. Okay, so let's get to number 5. And if you are just joining in as a listener, seriously, you got to go back to the beginning because you've missed most of it now. We're at number 5 in the 5 principles that teams can adopt to increase agility without doing agile. We started with do less and moved on to do it sooner, then do it better, do it together. And here we are with Kevin Sutherland, and we're on to number 5, learn and repeat. Take us through that, Kevin.
Sure. So, I mean, we've already talked about this a little bit, but back to Kneffen, in an emergent, complex domain of work, thinking and learning is often the most abundant thing that is a result of the things that we do. We're often in just this constant state of discovery. I think it's interesting. You could measure the extent to which this is true by keeping track of everything that you produce in a given day. If you're a knowledge worker, right? Like, let's just download or keep track of everything that I produced in a day, every email, everything, right? And then end of the day, see how long it takes you to rekey it from wherever it is into a new spot, right? And my guess would be that the amount of time that it takes the keystrokes is significantly less than it took to do all the thinking, the learning that was required to produce the work. And this is also why, someone that's an expert in something can work much faster often in some cases, because there's less time that's being spent learning and thinking about the work that needs to be done, which is also why a together approach is often more effective, because you've got lots of people that are doing the thinking, and the part that's not constrained is the writing down. And so if you've got a 3-to-1 ratio of thinking to writing, that's often about right. And that's what ensemble programming and some of those techniques have started to prove out. But yeah, like we talked about before, one of the keys here is focusing on that outcome, learning about what does it take to improve that outcome, and incorporating that into the next round of work that you're going forward with. And having a learning mindset just in general. So this was a podcast that you had on, I think, in December with April King, 5 steps to create a learning mindset, right? So I think just go listen to that podcast, and you've really nailed learn and repeat just right there, right? Is a key technique to this principle.
Be a learner is that's just one of the things that lights me up in the strengths finder, the various mindsets there. Achiever is my first, followed quickly by learner. And so between the two of them, either I've accomplished it or I've learned something. So every day is a good day for me, right? So every day is a good day. Either I got done what I was supposed to do, or I learned how to do it better next time. And so I can end every day smarter than I started it. And that appeals to me greatly. And so I look at these ways to learn, and the thought to me of not approaching a day that way just befuddles me. I don't understand why you wouldn't want to just soak every possible learning out of whatever experience you just had. So I always have to stop and sort of remind myself that no, not everybody remembers to do that as their first instinct. So we do have to stop and remind ourselves that we got to learn, and then we got to go repeat, apply our learnings to go do it again and put into play what we just learned. Yeah, for sure. So, Kevin, this would not be the Even Better podcast if I did not ask you what's making you even better these days.
Oh boy, so many things. I'll stick with the more professional oriented ones, but I guess one thing I would mention is that I'm just part of a fantastic team in the work that I'm doing at Iowa Medicaid, a group with just diverse perspectives, lots of great experience. We've been fortunate enough to have been working together long enough to have built a good set of trust so we can challenge each other, give each other feedback. And so I'm constantly learning things I can be doing better through the ongoing discussions that we have and the work that we're doing. Participating in book clubs and doing some, like, straight out of April's episode, right? Just part of the Des Moines Tech Book Club, where we're currently reading. What are we reading right now? Radical Candor. Just finished Never Split the Difference. A lot of great content. I learned something every day from the folks that we engage with and from the content that we're engaged with as well. So yeah, so many great things to help me improve. It's awesome.
Outstanding. Kevin, if any of our listeners wanted to reach out to you, of course, they can reach out to us and we'll get them in touch with you. But if they wanted to reach out to you directly, what's the best way for them to do that?
Let's see. Well, I think probably my email, kjsuther@si-delivery.com would be the best way to get in contact with me.
Okay. Sounds great. Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for making time today. We've been talking about 5 principles teams can adopt to increase agility without doing Agile. Thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. And for those of you who've been listening today, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate your time. And on behalf of all of us here at Your Clear Next Step, we hope the rest of your day is even better.
Thank you for tuning in today. The Even Better podcast will be back with more content soon. But in the meantime, subscribe to our podcast or check out our website at yourclearnextstep.com for more information. See you next episode.